Well, one of the things that's really exciting to me as a 57-year-old woman who's dominating the charts globally,
Stop for a second, take a breath, and ask yourself something real. Not something political, not something emotional, something honest. When you hear the words Islam and Christians, what immediately comes to your mind? Conflict? Debate? Difference? Tension? Or do you think about shared belief, shared prophets, shared morality, shared humanity? Because here's the truth most people never slow down enough to realize. Narratives are powerful, and the loudest narratives are not always the most accurate ones. We live in a world where division spreads faster than understanding. One headline, one viral clip, one angry comment, and suddenly entire faiths are reduced to stereotypes. But today, we're not here for noise. We're here for clarity. We're here to ask a deeper question. What does Islam actually say about Christians? Not what culture says, not what politics says, not what extremists say. What does Islam itself say? Because when you open the Qur'an, when you actually look at the words, something surprising happens. The tone is not what many expect. The language is not built on hatred. It's built on recognition. Christians are called a people of the book. Think about that. That's not dismissal. That's acknowledgement. That's respect for revelation, respect for scripture, respect for shared spiritual legacy. Shared spiritual legacy. But it goes deeper than a title. Islam doesn't begin with erasing Christians. It begins with recognizing common ground. Belief in one God, belief in prophets, belief in accountability, belief that life has meaning. That changes the entire frame of the conversation. Because once you realize there is shared foundation, you stop seeing only difference. You start seeing connection. And here's why this matters. If you misunderstand what your faith says about others, you risk misrepresenting your own faith. If you build your worldview on assumptions instead of knowledge, you don't just harm relationships, you weaken your own understanding. This conversation is not about watering down beliefs. It's not about ignoring differences. Differences exist. They are real. They are theological. And they are theological. They are important, but strength is not built by pretending common ground doesn't exist. Strength is built by understanding fully, both similarities and distinctions, without fear. So today, we're going to challenge surface-level thinking. We're going to challenge emotional reactions. For us, we're going to go straight to principles. Respect, unity and monotheism, dialogue with wisdom, shared morality. And here's the deeper question behind all of it. If Islam teaches justice, mercy, and dignity, are we embodying that when we talk about others? Because at the end of the day, this is bigger than a theological discussion. This is about character. This is about how belief translates into behavior. This is about whether faith produces arrogance or integrity. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you won't just understand what Islam says about Christians. You'll understand what your responsibility is in representing Islam correctly. When we begin to explore what Islam says about Christians, the very first thing we must understand is that Islam does not approach Christianity with dismissal, hostility, or erasure. It approaches it with recognition. In the Quran, Christians are referred to as Ul al-Kitab, meaning a people of the book. That title is not casual. It is not accidental. It is a deliberate acknowledgement that Christians are recipients of divine revelation, people connected to scripture, to prophecy, and to a tradition rooted in worship of God. This alone changes the entire tone of the conversation. It means that Islam does not see Christians as spiritually irrelevant. It sees them as part of the extended story of Revelation. This recognition builds a foundation of respect. And respect in Islam is not just about being polite. It is about justice, fairness, and moral responsibility. The Quran explicitly instructs Muslims to speak to the people of the book in ways that are best, in ways that are wise, and in ways that are kind. That instruction creates a mindset. It tells Muslims that when interacting with Christians, they are not entering a battlefield. They are entering a dialogue. They are engaging with people who also believe in God, who honor prophets, who value prayer, charity, and morality. That shared spiritual vocabulary matters. Islam recognizes core shared beliefs between Muslims and Christians. Both traditions affirm belief in one God, even though theological understandings differ. Both revere prophets. Both uphold moral accountability. Both teach compassion, charity, and service. In fact, figures such as Jesus and Mary are deeply honored in Islam. Jesus, known as Isa in Islamic tradition, is considered one of the greatest prophets. Mary, or Maryam, has an entire chapter of the Qur'an named after her. These are not small details. In fact, they demonstrate continuity and reverence rather than rejection. When you truly absorb that, something shifts. It becomes harder to reduce the other to a stereotype. It becomes harder to fuel hatred when your own scripture commands recognition. The label people of the book establishes common ground before differences are even discussed. And common ground is powerful. It creates stability. It creates the possibility of peace. Respect in this context is also practical. Islamic law historically provided specific protections for Christian communities living under Muslim governance. They were allowed to maintain their churches, practice their faith, and govern their personal religious matters. While history is complex and human beings are imperfect, the foundational principle remained clear. Christians were not to be erased. They were to be acknowledged and protected as part of a plural society. But this keynote is not just about historical arrangements. It is about mindset. Islam teaches that differences in faith are part of human reality. The Quran states that if God had willed, humanity would have been made one single community, but instead diversity exists as part of divine wisdom. That perspective reframes religious difference. It stops being a threat and becomes a test of character. How will you behave when you disagree? Will you choose hostility or dignity? Will you choose arrogance or humility? This is where the motivational dimension becomes clear. Respect is strength. It takes discipline to remain just when emotions run high. It takes maturity to recognize value in someone who believes differently. Islam calls Muslims to that higher standard. Justice is not conditional on agreement. Kindness is not conditional on sameness. The Quran commands believers to stand firmly for justice, even if it is against themselves. That ethic naturally extends to interfaith relationships. Shared beliefs also create opportunities for cooperation. Muslims and Christians share commitments to charity, family structure, modesty, moral responsibility, and concern for the poor. These shared values can become bridges rather than barriers. When communities focus on these shared principles, they can work together to improve society instead of competing for dominance. At a deeper level, recognizing Christians as people of the book also protects Muslims from spiritual arrogance. It reminds them that revelation did not begin with them. It reminds them that divine guidance has touched many communities throughout history. That awareness fosters humility, and humility is essential for personal growth. When you understand that God has guided others too, you become less obsessed with superiority and more focused on integrity. This respect does not mean theological agreement. Islam and Christianity differ on important doctrines, including the nature of Jesus and certain aspects of theology. Islam is clear about its own beliefs, but disagreement does not erase dignity. If two communities both believe in one supreme creator who sees their actions, hears their prayers, and judges their deeds, then both communities are anchored in moral responsibility. That belief shapes behavior. It influences honesty in business, compassion in relationships, generosity toward the poor, and patience in hardship. Shared monotheism fosters shared moral seriousness. It creates societies where ethics matter because God matters. Unity in monotheism also shifts perspective from competition to cooperation. If both Muslims and Christians claim to serve the same ultimate creator, then hostility becomes harder to justify. It forces a deeper question. If we believe in one God who commands justice and mercy, how should we treat one another? The answer cannot be cruelty or arrogance. It must be fairness and dignity. Belief in one God is not just a theological statement. It is a moral compass. Islam also honors many of the same prophetic figures revered in Christianity. Abraham, Moses, David, and especially Jesus hold significant positions in Islamic theology. Jesus, known as Isa, considered one of the greatest prophets in Islam. His miraculous birth, his message, and his moral example are affirmed. While Islam does not accept the Christian understanding of his divinity, it deeply respects him as a messenger of God. This shared reverence reinforces the sense of spiritual continuity rather than rupture. So, when people focus only on theological disputes, they often overlook this continuity. But continuity matters. It tells a story of revelation unfolding across time. Islam presents itself not as a rejection of previous monotheistic traditions, but as a continuation and clarification of the same fundamental call: worship God alone. That framing changes the narrative from rivalry to restoration. It says the conversation is not about replacing God. It is about understanding Him correctly. There is also a psychological dimension to unity in monotheism. Believing in one God unifies human identity. It removes the idea that different groups have different ultimate creators. It affirms that humanity shares the same origin and the same ultimate return. The Qur'an repeatedly reminds believers that all people were created from a single soul. That idea dismantles superiority complexes. Say, if the Creator is one and humanity shares a common source, then racial, ethnic, and cultural divisions lose their moral legitimacy. This unity also encourages dialogue. When Muslims and Christians engage in conversation about faith, they are not starting from zero. They already share vocabulary: God, prayer, revelation, prophecy, judgment, heaven, and morality. That shared language makes meaningful exchange possible. It allows for discussion that is deep rather than superficial. It opens the door to understanding instead of fear. In today's world, where religious identities are sometimes weaponized, returning to this foundational unity is urgent. Belief in one God should inspire humility, not hostility. It should motivate believers to embody the ethical teachings they claim to uphold. When Muslims and Christians both believe they will stand before God one day, that belief should make them careful with their words and actions toward one another. Unity in monotheism does not erase differences, but it contextualizes them to. It says that despite theological disagreements, there is a shared orientation toward the divine. That shared orientation can serve as a platform for peace building, community service, and collaborative moral leadership. Imagine the impact if communities focused more on their shared accountability to God than on proving one another wrong. Islam's recognition of this unity reflects confidence, not insecurity. A faith that is secure in its belief does not fear acknowledging shared ground. It does not crumble when similarities are highlighted. Instead, it stands firm while extending a hand. That posture is powerful. Imagine the impact if Muslims approach Christians consistently with patience and courtesy. Misunderstandings would decrease, suspicion would weaken, respect would grow. Dialogue would become an opportunity rather than a threat. When kindness leads conversations, change tone. Even disagreements feel different. They become exchanges of perspective rather than battles for dominance. Islam also teaches that guidance ultimately comes from God. That belief removes pressure from the individual. A Muslim does not carry the burden of forcing belief into someone else's heart. Their responsibility is simply to convey truth clearly and embody it sincerely. This perspective encourages calmness in dialogue. It prevents desperation and hostility. If guidance is in God's hands, then arrogance and coercion become unnecessary. There is also a spiritual benefit to kindness and kindness. When you treat someone with dignity despite differences, you refine your own character. You strengthen your patience. You discipline your ego. Islam repeatedly emphasizes purification of the heart. Interfaith interactions become part of that purification process. They test humility. They test sincerity. They test whether belief translates into behavior. Kindness does not mean compromising core beliefs. Islam maintains its theological positions clearly. It disagrees respectfully on certain doctrines, but disagreement is not the same as disrespect. The Qur'an even instructs Muslims not to insult what others worship, lest they insult God out of ignorance. That command demonstrates remarkable foresight. It recognizes that hostility breeds hostility. It teaches restraint as a protective measure for communal harmony. Dialogue also fosters learning. When Muslims and Christians speak openly, they gain insight into one another's traditions. Misconceptions can be corrected. Shared values can be highlighted. Fear often grows in silence. Conversation reduces fear. Islam's encouragement of dialogue counters ignorance directly. In today's globalized world, Muslims and Christians live side by side in many societies. Cooperation is not optional. It is necessary. Shared projects, humanitarian work, education, and social initiatives often require collaboration across faith lines. The Qur'anic call to kindness supports this cooperation. It builds a framework where collaboration does not threaten identity. Ultimately, the third keynote teaches that how you communicate reflects what you believe. If Islam teaches mercy, justice, and wisdom, then those qualities must appear in speech and conduct. Dialogue is not merely about exchanging ideas, it is about demonstrating integrity. Kindness is not weakness, it is disciplined strength. It shows control over ego and commitment to principle. When Muslims internalize this teaching, they become ambassadors of their faith through character before words. And when Christians experience that character, it reshapes perceptions. Respect becomes mutual, conversations become constructive, communities become more stable. Encouragement for dialogue and kindness is therefore not just a social recommendation. It is a spiritual directive. It calls believers to rise above impulse and embody excellence. It challenges them to prove their faith not through confrontation, but through composure. And when composure guides conversation, even deep differences can exist without destroying peace. When we speak about shared values and morality between Islam and Christianity, we are stepping into one of the most powerful areas of connection. Beyond theology, beyond doctrinal debates, beyond historical tensions, there is something deeply human that binds both communities together. A moral framework centered on accountability before God and responsibility toward others. Islam does not teach Muslims to ignore the good found in other communities. In fact, the Qur'an openly acknowledges that among the people of the book are those who are sincere, devoted, and committed to righteousness. That recognition alone sets a powerful tone. It tells Muslims to look for virtue, not just difference. Both Islam and Christianity emphasize honesty, charity, patience, forgiveness, compassion, and family responsibility. These are not small overlaps. These are foundational moral pillars. When a Christian gives charity to the poor, feeds the hungry, cares for the sick, or supports their family, Islam does not deny the goodness of those actions. Goodness is goodness. Moral excellence is morally excellent, regardless of who performs it. Islam teaches that God is perfectly just and that no act of righteousness goes unnoticed. That principle encourages Muslims to respect virtue wherever it appears. Shared morality creates a bridge that is often stronger than theological debate. You may disagree with someone on doctrine, but when you see them caring for the vulnerable, honoring their parents, telling the truth, or showing patience in hardship, you recognize something familiar. Islam deeply values these traits. The Prophet Muhammad emphasized that the best among people are those with the best character. Character is not exclusive to one group. It is a universal measure of integrity. Consider charity, for example. In Islam, giving to the poor is not optional. It is a pillar of faith. In Christianity, charity is also central. Both traditions command generosity. Both view wealth as a trust, not absolute ownership. When Muslims and Christians engage in charitable work, they often stand shoulder to shoulder, serving the same communities. That cooperation is rooted in shared moral conviction. It reflects belief in a God who commands care for the vulnerable. Family values are another major point of connection. Both Islam and Christianity emphasize respect for parents, commitment in marriage, and responsibility toward children. Both traditions discourage exploitation, dishonesty, and injustice. Both teach that actions have consequences beyond this life. When two faith communities hold similar ethical standards, they share more than people sometimes realize. They share a moral worldview that sees life as purposeful and accountable. Islam also teaches fairness even toward those with whom there is disagreement. Justice is not selective. The Qur'an commands believers to stand firmly for justice, even if it is against themselves or their own community. That ethical demand naturally extends to Christians. Muslims are not permitted to deny rights or act unjustly simply because someone follows a different faith. Shared morality reinforces this principle. If both communities claim to serve a just God, then both must embody justice. Another shared value is patience during hardship. Both traditions teach that trials are part of life and that perseverance strengthens the soul. When communities experience difficulty, this shared understanding of suffering can create empathy rather than division. Both Muslims and Christians pray, seek forgiveness, and turn to God in times of struggle. That shared spiritual reflex builds common emotional ground. Forgiveness is equally significant. Christianity strongly emphasizes forgiveness, and Islam also places immense value on pardoning others. The Qur'an repeatedly encourages believers to forgive and reconcile when possible. Mercy is a central attribute of God in Islam, and believers are encouraged to reflect that mercy in their behavior. When both traditions elevate forgiveness, it opens space for healing and reconciliation between communities. Shared morality also influences public life. When Muslims and Christians advocate for honesty in business, protection of the vulnerable, and ethical governance, they are drawing from overlapping moral reservoirs. Cooperation in these areas strengthens society. It demonstrates that religious diversity does not automatically produce moral chaos. Instead, it can enrich ethical commitment. Islam's recognition of moral goodness among Christians also protects Muslims from arrogance. It prevents the assumption that righteousness is monopolized by one group. Humility grows when believers acknowledge that others are capable of sincerity and virtue. The Qur'an explicitly states that among the people of the book are those who are upright, who recite God's revelations and prostrate in prayer. That acknowledgement builds respect. At a deeper level, shared morality reminds humanity of its common origin. Both Islam and Christianity teach that human beings were created by God and endowed with moral awareness. Conscience is not random. It is part of divine design. When Muslims and Christians respond similarly to injustice, cruelty, or exploitation, it reflects that shared moral imprint. Of course, differences exist. Ethical applications may vary in certain areas, and theological beliefs influence moral reasoning, but the overlap remains substantial. Recognizing it does not dilute faith. It strengthens understanding. It shows that religious diversity does not erase moral commonality. In a world where religious differences are often highlighted for conflict, focusing on shared values shifts the narrative. Instead of asking, where do we disagree? It asks, where can we build together? Shared morality becomes a platform for cooperation, dialogue, and mutual respect. Ultimately, this keynote teaches that Islam encourages Muslims to see the good in Christians, to acknowledge virtue where it exists, and to uphold justice and kindness consistently. Shared values are not accidental. They are reflections of belief in a moral creator. When both communities live according to their highest ethical teachings, they contribute to stability, compassion, and social harmony. And when morality becomes the meeting point, it reminds everyone that faith is not only about doctrine. It is about character. It is about how you treat others. It is about whether belief translates into action. In that space where honesty, charity, patience, and compassion live, Muslims and Christians often stand much closer than they realize. So now we arrive at the real question. Not what Islam says about Christians. You've heard that. And you've seen the principles: recognition, unity and belief in one God, dialogue with wisdom, shared morality. The real question is this: what are you going to do with that knowledge? Because information means nothing without transformation. If Islam calls Christians a people of the book, then that's not just a theological label. It's a responsibility. If Islam commands justice and kindness, then that's not theory. That's behavior. If Islam acknowledges shared moral ground, then that's not weakness. That's strength. That's strength. And strength is proven in how you treat people who are different from you. Look around the world. Division is easy. Anger is easy. Misunderstanding is easy, but discipline, respect, thoughtful dialogue, that takes maturity. That takes confidence. That takes real faith. And here's the powerful part. When you represent your faith with integrity, you don't just protect Islam, you elevate it. You show that belief in one God produces stability, not chaos. Mercy, not cruelty. Intelligence, not ignorance. Islam does not need loud defenders. It needs principled representatives. You don't prove the truth of your faith by attacking someone else's. You prove it by embodying its highest values, by being just when it's easier to be biased, by being calm when it's easier to react, by being respectful when it's easier to stereotype, and reject. Because at the end of the day, every single one of us will stand before the same creator we claim to worship. And on that day, we won't be asked how well we won arguments. We'll be asked how we carried ourselves, how we treated people, whether our character reflected what we claim to believe. This topic is not about compromise, it's about clarity. Islam has its beliefs. Christianity has its beliefs. Differences exist, but Islam's instruction is clear. Speak with wisdom, act with justice, recognize shared humanity. Imagine what would change if more people actually lived that. Imagine conversations without hostility. Imagine disagreement without dehumanization. Imagine strength without arrogance. That starts with you, not with governments, not with headlines, not with social media debates, with you, with your tone, with your knowledge, with your character. If you truly believe Islam is a religion of truth, then show that truth through discipline. If you truly believe it is a religion of mercy, then reflect mercy in your interactions. If you truly believe in one God, then let that belief refine your behavior, because faith is not proven in comfort. It is proven in challenge. And if you carry this understanding forward, if you combine conviction with respect, clarity with compassion, then you won't just understand what Islam says about Christians. You will represent Islam in a way that commands respect without demanding it.